I mean, what I'm saying to people is, look, if you make enough money that you need to, park some of your money in an investment that will be profitable in the future, then why don't you lease it to us for $1 a year? And we will give you more goodwill and great publicity than you could ever pay for. Bring the arts back to San Francisco.
That was P. Segal. I'm Jeff. Welcome to Storied San Francisco, a weekly podcast where San Franciscans from all walks of life share their stories, and you get to know your neighbors. In this episode, P talks about her return to the city. She immersed herself in North Beach art and intellectual circles, but ended up getting evicted. Then she found a place in the Western Addition, joined the Cacophony Society, and opened Cafe Proust. These days, P has turned her attention toward establishing affordable housing for artists, something she feels the city sorely needs, and we agree. Here's P.
Of course, I was looking for a job, and so I came into the city every day, and I would just end up hanging around in North Beach at the Trieste in the afternoon.
What year would this have been?
78.
Okay.
And then around maybe 6 o'clock, I would just move up the street, up Grant Avenue to the terrace of the Savoy Tivoli, which, the Savoy Tivoli is one of the great losses of San Francisco cultural history, because on the terrace of the Savoy Tivoli, there were, hundreds of, intellectuals and poets and artists and writers, and the conversation there was always interesting. Always. And also at the Trieste, it was almost always pretty interesting.
The Tivoli had music, did it not, also around that time? A little bit of punk rock kind of stuff?
It had a theater in the very back, which burned down after Allen Ginsberg and Peter Orlovsky gave their famous reading there. So, yeah, it lost the theater part, but still, I mean, just the culture of the bar was, just fascinating. You didn't really need entertainment in those days because you had people with ideas, and it was pretty exciting living there at that time.
What kind of folks were you hanging out with around that time?
Well, it's actually a fascinating story about the social life of North Beach, because, North Beach is a small pond full of really smart people. And at the time, when I first started spending all my time there, it was not yet political. It was creative, it was intellectual, but it was not political.
Was that where you connected with Cacophony Society, or?
No, actually, Cacophony didn't exist yet.
Okay.
But their predecessor, the Suicide Club, did indeed. And one of the people that I knew at on the Savoy Terrace was a member of the Suicide Club, and I kept saying, "Introduce me." And he said, "No." So, but also I was deeply involved in other things in North Beach at the time. I was deeply engrossed in buying the old spaghetti factory when Freddie Koo put it up for sale.
Okay.
And that is another long story, which I won't get into now. But I lost the spaghetti factory, unfortunately, and at the same time, I got an owner move-in eviction to my flat, my North Beach flat that I paid $400 a month for. And I looked for months for another place in North Beach. There was just nothing. And so I started looking at other parts of town and found an ad for a 14-room, 2-story flat in the Western Addition for $1,800.
Oh my God.
So I went to look at it, and very soon thereafter I moved in with 4 artist friends.
That was Golden Gate and Baker?
Okay. 1907 Golden Gate. And that place really, it was it was such a hub of stuff. It was bigger than all of the places I spent my life in North Beach put together. It was, if you put my flat and the Savoy and the Trieste into 1907 Golden Gate, you'd still have some room left over, so it was pretty wonderful, except for the fact that there were no neighborhood cafes in those days. But other than that, it was just, extraordinary. It was built by these 2 architect brothers, the Brown brothers, who were 2 of the architects that worked on the rebuilding of City Hall after the earthquake and fire. And they built this building, Golden Gate and Baker, for themselves. So it was grand. We had a back parlor that was all redwood.
Oh my God.
And fireplaces and front and back parlors, and it was amazing. So for several years of living at 1907, I still tried to find the Suicide Club.
Right.
But I couldn't, because it was a secret society.
Right.
And for good reason. I mean, because, most of the things they did were, not the sort of things you want to get out on the airwaves.
Like on a podcast.
Yes. But I loved the idea that everything that they did was an exercise in challenging your fears. That sounded like a really good thing to do to me.
John told us, I think it was Suicide, it might have been Cacophony, about the full dinner that they did on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh yeah, that was an annual thing.
Yeah, climbing everything in sight, literally.
Right. I mean, I didn't do a lot of the physically challenging things because I have terrible depth perception, But I mean, the first event that I went to was the midnight walking tour of the Oakland storm drains, and John Law had to carry me over a couple of rough patches. So I decided, it was probably better not to endanger my fellow cacophonists doing, things that were
graceful bow out.
Yes.
Yes.
But I mean, there were so many things to do. And the reason why I met Cacophony, after trying so long to find Suicide Club, was that one of my housemates in that flat, Kevin Evans, the artist who did that painting over the door, went to art school with Carrie Galbraith, who was also one of the editors of the Cacophony book. And so he invited them to one of the thousands of massive parties we had in that 14-room, 2-story flat. And I'm standing in the back parlor talking to somebody at this party and staring out at the large bay window across the room. And I see a hand coming over the windowsill. And I am thinking, there is no fire escape out there. And seconds later, I see the head and torso of John Law climbing into my living room. So that was the night I joined Cacophony.
That's all it took.
That's all it took. I mean, he's very persuasive anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. And then John started coming to our house almost every night, and there was always a crowd of people around the kitchen table, discussing things, making things, drawing things. And my young artist roommates had all their art school friends hanging out there. They called themselves the Art Babies. And John would take them on these wild excursions around the city in the wee hours of the night. And then, everybody in Cacophony just started hanging out there. Our door was unlocked for 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. We just let, people came in whenever.
Why would you lock it?
Exactly. I mean, we were safe for a lot of reasons. One was that the neighbors found us very entertaining. All the black neighbors that had lived in that neighborhood for, since after World War II, they were always curious to see what sort of things we were going to carry in and out of the house, and what sort of events we were doing. And they hadn't seen anything as offbeat and crazy as us since the last days of the Harlem of the West. So we were their entertainment. Okay. And they all watched out for us. There was this one guy who went up and down the streets on a bicycle. I knew he was selling drugs, so that's what he was doing. The neighborhood was pretty wild back in those days. But he carried my groceries home for me all the time. Every time he saw me on the street carrying bags of groceries, he would pick them up and get them to my door for me.
Adorable.
Yeah, it was pretty. It was very warm.
Yeah,
the neighbors were so inviting and just fun to be around. And then, of course, when Cacophony became a regular feature of the life of 1907 Golden Gate, we would come and go at all these weird hours, dressed in costumes. Like today we're, 18th century French aristocrats doing a let them eat cake event, or we would come out in clown costumes. Or whatever, Edwardian costumes for all the Proust events. I come from a family where I was schooled in cuisine from an early age. And I've always wanted to own a restaurant. And I worked in the food business for years, mostly as a caterer. But, when I was a lot younger, I was a waitress, and, I actually did a couple of years bartending too, or no, 1 year bartending. But I did a lot of dinner parties, and probably 100 people said to me over the years, "If you ever open a restaurant, I'll invest."
That's a nice thing to hear.
It was a very nice thing to hear. And so one day I was leaving 1907 and heading down Baker Street to McAllister, and I saw that the the space at the corner across McAllister was for rent. And because I'd lived in the neighborhood for a long time, I knew that it had been a restaurant in the past. I went and looked at the space, and it was big and really beautiful, with tall columns and windows on two sides, huge floor-to-ceiling windows on two sides of the building, and so I wrote a business plan, and I called a lot of friends, and I said, "Do you remember when you said, if I ever opened a restaurant, you'd invest?"
You said it was 100, right? They all get that.
So 19 people actually
Awesome.
put in money.
Awesome.
And then all my Cacophony friends and artist friends came in and made the place beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, because everybody, had some amazing skill, like, producing textured walls and color, design, and then we raided everybody's parents' garages and attics for sofas.
Yep.
And we bought all these old tables, and this is one of the tables from Cafe Proust, actually.
Oh, nice.
Proust wrote about a lot of themes. There are a lot of themes that go through the 3,000 pages of In Search of Lost Time, and one of them was Venice, because he loved Venice so much and spent a lot of time there. And this was the one table that the most people asked to sit at. Every table at Cafe Proust had a theme. Male-female relationships, the seaside, Paris, whatever. So this was the only table I kept. I tried to refinish it after it started cracking. Did a terrible job.
So the name of the cafe wasn't just random. The cafe was more or less Proust themed.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, it came from a Cacophony event, actually. One of my housemates in 1907 said to me one day, I said, "It's your birthday's coming up. What do you want? What do you want to do?" And he said, "I want you to read Proust with me because I can't do it alone." And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I've tried to read Proust. I don't know." And he said, "Oh, it'll be fun. 10 pages a day. We can do it." And then he suggested that we put it in the Cacophony newsletter. So we did. We actually got 40 people to read Proust. And after that, I started reading every book I could about Proust. I have quite a collection, actually, because I was so fascinated by his insight, his brilliance, and then this all happened right around the time when zines became immensely popular.
90s.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I launched a zine called Proust Said That, because after reading Proust, almost every conversation I had with anybody, I would end up saying, Proust said that, or Proust said that, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
So I started doing this zine towards I guess I had done 8 issues or 7 issues when I found the restaurant, and thinking about what to call it, there was only one choice.
Yeah. It all came together.
Yes.
Also, cafes used to have sofas. I miss that.
Yeah, we had sofas.
So what are you doing now?
Well, as I said, of course, I grew up in San Francisco in a time when it was full of artists, and it was such a stimulating, fascinating place to live and be. And throughout my life, I've always been surrounded by people who make art. I mean, But starting around 1995, my artist friends started leaving town. Now I have about half a dozen artist friends who still actually live in the city. And it was at one of the events that I did in, I think, 2014. It was the annual wake for Marcel Proust, because he died on my birthday. And I used to make a full-size dead Proust cake. But,
Awesome.
at this particular event in 2014, there were so few people left to celebrate the death of the anniversary of Proust's death that I made a small cake. So, at that event, one of my friends who lived under me at 1907 and still had his flat there, years after I had moved out, came into the event and said, I just got an owner move and eviction, and I'm moving to Kansas. And I thought, what has happened to this city? A city that built its reputation for bohemian charm, and now has no room for bohemians. I mean, there's, the artists who made it beautiful, nobody cares if they stay or go. That's ridiculous. So, I talked to some friends about it, and they said, you should start a nonprofit for, an artist housing project. So we did. We started a nonprofit called Bohemia Redux. And one of my board members, who's actually a member of the San Francisco Symphony, said to me, I don't like that name. But I'd already filed the papers. And she said, how do you expect me to promote a project that has a name that I can't pronounce? But, anyway, I hung on to it for a while. And then I realized how hard it is to run a nonprofit. You need a staff. You can't do it while working in the gig economy as a freelance writer. And so we regrouped under the new name Art House, which, as everyone has said, well, it actually says what you are.
Yeah.
And we have a fairly unusual business model, which in fact is really hard to fit into the traditional nonprofit funding patterns. Because what we're really proposing is that we partner with people who buy real estate solely for investment purposes and leave it empty. I mean, we just found out that there are 38,000 empty units in the city, that people in buildings that people bought for the very solid investment of real estate in San Francisco. And it's just sitting there empty. And also, the city owns lots of property that it
They
is
should
not
own
using.
more.
And they're holding on to it because why? Because if they gave it to me to use for artist housing, then they wouldn't have it to give to their wealthy friends for whatever. So I don't know why, but anyway, the point is that it's an unusual model. And I mean, what I'm saying to people is, look, if you make enough money that you need to, park some of your money in an investment that will be profitable in the future, then why don't you lease it to us for $1 a year? And we will give you more goodwill and great publicity than you could ever pay for. Bring the arts back to San Francisco. Use your investment money to give the city back what it is sorely missing. I mean, when you see these articles coming out now about how San Francisco has lost its soul, well, yeah, it's lost the people that made it so charming. So, I'm saying, look, if you want to invest in something that will do wonders for your social standing, then this is it. And of course, I'm just at the beginning now because we have just started under the new name, and we don't even have a website yet. I'm looking for people, who would like to get involved, but everything takes so long. We have wonderful fiscal sponsorship from Intersection for the Arts, which is historically wonderful support for the arts community, but they haven't been able to stop the displacement. So when I went in there and said, I want to stop the displacement, and in fact I want to restore it, the director said, that's a very noble pursuit. But I am at the beginning again.
Was there anything else you want to throw out? How can people listening to this help? Like you mentioned a couple times, you're like, if anyone wants to join, but specifically maybe.
Yes. Well, needless to say, this is one of the appalling parts about, being in the nonprofit world, is that you always have to remind people that they can donate and that we need money, because we need equipment, we need promotional materials, we need a website, lots of things. And so if anyone would like to donate, they can donate to Intersection for the Arts /Art House. That's capital ART, capital HOUSE, one word in the modern form. So, and of course, any contributions to the effort are immensely appreciated.
That was P. Segal. Join us next week when we'll hear from Irish Skateboards founder George Rocha. Music for Storied San Francisco is by Otis MacDonald. Film photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. The show is hosted and produced by me, Jeff Hunt. Our website is storiedsf.com, where you can browse more than 100 episodes, check out all of our live events, and visit our store to help support us. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If that's Apple Podcasts or iTunes, please do us a favor and rate and review what we do. And if you have any feedback for us or suggested guests, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.